Hello everyone. On behalf of Industrial Services Bureau, I warmly welcome you all for this webinar today. It is on building climate resilience industry, the impact, implications, and the role of the industries in climate action. It has been a proven fact that the world is now experiencing significant climate impacts on the environment as well as on human activities. The climate change is real compared to numerous other causes for the climate change and the greenhouse gas emission. The industry take top priorities. Thus, there's an essential role of the industries to get involved in the climate action. As a step toward this, the conventional industrial development pattern should be transformed to more climate resilience. The climate resilience industries build on cleaner and resource-efficient production technologies, practices that decouple economic growth from unsustainable resource consumption and environmental degradation. So that is why the Industrial Services Bureau, which is working with large number of industries, especially in Northwestern Province as well as many other provinces in Sri Lanka, brought the industrial clients together and set this webinar to share our experience, share the experience of the pioneers, and share the experience of the experts for this important endeavor. So without speaking much, first of all, I would like to give this opportunity to Mr. Nilakant Vaninayaka, who is the Executive Director and the Chief Executive Officer of Industrial Services Bureau, to welcome you all.
Thank you, Madhusha. Ayubowan. Good evening, everyone. And on behalf of ISB, let me take this opportunity to first of all welcome you all, and especially with a very short notice for accepting our invitation and decided to provide the expertise, especially our resource panel. A good friend, Mr. Ranga Pallavela, who is the National Climate Finance Advisor of the Commonwealth Secretariat. So I warmly welcome to you on this virtual forum. And then also we also have invited the industry representing agriculture sector, manufacturing sector, and the service sector. Ms. Shamodi Nanakara from Dilma Plantation, representing agriculture sector, and then Mr. Tanuji Chayapala, Manager Environmental Sustainability, Mass Holdings, and then again so Ms. Shashika Kaluaheba, Assistant Manager Sustainability, Chetwin Group, representing the service industry. So let me welcome you all to this important virtual forum for accepting our invitation and decided to share your experience on this very important occasion. At the outset, I really wanted to, I mean, it's very important for us to declare, I would say, or rather set the objectives. So in fact, as you know, similar to the previous years, this year too, so the World Environmental Day celebrated on 5th June. But due to the very important the webinar organized by the Institution of Engineers Sri Lanka with regard to the disaster Pearl Express, so we have decided not to have the two programs on the same day. So with that, the Madhusha, the one who organized this very important webinar, have decided to conduct this important topic today. So with that, so I mean, our main objective is to discuss the climate resilient industry impact, implication, and the roles of the industries in climate action. As Madhusha rightly mentioned, she, they explained. I ISB, with their passion and also with their commitment towards the environmental, the sustainability. Now, ISB is right now working with the Climate Change Secretariat under the Ministry of Environment to get the accreditation as a national implementing entity for the Climate Adaptation Fund and similarly Global Climate Fund. So with that, we certainly would like to work with the industry. I mean, right now, through ISB, with our wide scope of work, we have been working with the industry since 1990 in various ways. As you know, I mean, though ISB work based in Kurunegala as a regional organization, but we work throughout the country. With that passion, so with that commitment towards the sustainability and the environmental, one of the responsible organization, so we have decided to organize this program. So that is one of the objectives, and also this is in line with the World Environmental Day. And I hope with the accreditation, suppose if you are able to obtain the accreditation to work as the national implementing entity under the Climate Change Secretariat and also the Global Climate Fund, hope we could work with you for the climate related industry, the project, and hopefully, so our role is to work at the sub-grant management organization. So with that little remarks, so let me wind up my, the welcome remarks, and with let me hand over the control to Madhusha to take you from here and also to conduct the program. And I wish you could have a very successful and the very wonderful evening today. Over to you, Madhusha.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. And without taking much, we will move to the important session. Today, this webinar will consist with two sessions. First, the keynote speech, and then the experience sharing session. And also, it will be followed by question and answering session. So the first session is the keynote speech, which is going to be done by Mr. Ranga Pallawala. So we will move to the keynote speech now. Mr. Ranga Pallawala is currently working as the National Climate Finance Advisor to Belize, attached to Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub of the Commonwealth Secretariat. He is with over 18 years of professional experience in climate change, specifically on climate finance. He obtained his basic degree in agriculture from the University of Peradeniya in Sri Lanka and Masters in Environmental Management from the University of Colombo. He has actively involved in UNFCCC climate negotiations since 2009 as a negotiator in climate finance. Ranga has also worked on direct access of climate finance and supported a number of countries as an accreditation specialist for both Adaptation Fund and the Green Climate Fund. He is one of the members of the expert panel established by UN Environment Programme for South and Southeast Asia to support accreditation in NIEs under the Adaptation Fund. He has also served as an expert to the World Agroforestry Centre and the government of Sri Lanka on accessing finance from the Green Climate Fund. He has also engaged with World Bank, UNDP and UNEP in a number of climate change related assignments, especially in developing proposals for developing countries. So the time is for you, Mr. Pallawala. So the industries are waiting to hear you, hear your expertise. Over to you, Mr. Ranga.
Thank you very much, Madhu. Thank you very much, friends in ISB,
for inviting me to deliver the keynote speech in this the very important webinar. I would say could not celebrate have the webinar on the environment itself, but I think it's an important thing because we need to care about the environment 24/7, 365 days a year. What I'm going to do is I'm going to focus more on, as the topic suggests, to focus more on the industries and talk about what are the climate impacts and the implication and even the role of the industries in that way. I would start the presentation with this the beautiful photograph. Many of you would recognize this the particular nice building. This is in Nuwara. This is the main post office building in Nuwara, which was built during the British colony. The second post office building in Sri Lanka, and it's very ancient. You can see the architecture has been really influenced by the British architecture. I'm sharing this photograph because this is quite close to my the personal life as well, because I spent my childhood in Nuwara. My father being a government servant, and he served in and around Nuwara for many years. So I had my primary education, and I basically lived in Nuwara for almost 10 years. So living in Nuwara, of course, you have you get generally a lot of new experiences. One of the experiences that Nuwara is used to be the only place in Sri Lanka where the coconut oil is sold in kilograms, not in liters, not in bottles, because of the low temperature that you experience in Nuwara. The coconut oil solidifies, and it's very difficult to put it into cans or bottles. So what they do is they just put the coconut oil, the traders put coconut oil on trays, and they cut the coconut oil in pieces like cakes and weigh it and give it. So that's the used environment for me in Nuwara. And because the average temperature in Nuwara, of course, it's less than 23 degrees Celsius, and where the coconut oil solidifies very easily. But unfortunately, if you go to Nuwara now, the situation is not there. So we are celebrating the World Environment Day since 1974. If you go back to 1974 and now, after 46 years, the main difference is that basically the changed climate. The average usual temperatures of Nuwara is no more there. It has been disrupted mainly because of climate change. And I said it's very close to my personal life. And after year 5 scholarship, I moved to Colombo. And as soon as I moved to Colombo, this is something amazed me. I have never seen a ceiling fan in Nuwara. We never used a ceiling fan. We never used a refrigerator in Nuwara because the temperature is quite cool. And even if you cook certain food, you can keep it easily without refrigeration for a couple of days. And this amazed me. There's a fan, and it provides you a kind of a cooler breeze. And I was wondering why people are having it. It's not necessary. It's not quite necessary equipment. But again, if you compare the first Environment Day celebrations way back in 1974 and today, the household items in Nuwara also have changed. You might not be able to find a single household in Nuwara without either pedestal or a ceiling fan, or without a refrigerator, because now the climate in Nuwara is not used to be as in 1974, or that matters 1980s, and it's quite warmer. The vegetation is changing. The basic weather indicators are also changing. So what's the reason for this? And this is climate change. This is something that I wanted to explain climate change in a very simple manner, and something very close to my life. So during my presentation, I'm going to talk more about climate change and the impacts on Sri Lanka. I will be talk more. I will spend a little bit more time on implication of industries. I will not be specifying on certain industries, but I'll talk in broader sense, a generic industries perspective. And finally, I will move into and talk what would be the role of industries to face the climate change challenges, as well as to contribute to society as a resilient and a sustainable business. So climate change, of course, why climate change happened and why climate is important. I will go back to very basics of science. The Earth is a closed system. We have, in very simplified manner, we have 4 spheres in this world. One is the hydrosphere, where you have all the water-related components. It can be water vapor, it can be soil water, it can be runoff water, oceans, rivers, whatnot. And all the water component is there, and this water component is going in cycles. I think all of us in science, we have talked about the water cycle. And then we have the biosphere, where all the life component is there in the world. The fauna, flora, microorganism live in the atmosphere, on soil, in water. All this biological living things is there with the biosphere. Then we have the atmosphere, where most of the planet doesn't have. We have a thick atmosphere comprised of different composition of air. And finally, we have lithosphere. Lithosphere is where you have all the minerals, soils, rocks, etc. And all these 4, the spheres are in a balance, and it goes in cycles. Some cycles move very fast in terms of timeline, and some cycles move very slowly. And all these cycles are not independent. Those have interrelationships. So it lives as a one whole ecosystem. And this cycling or the cyclic process is powered by sun. The energy required for the cycles have been given by the solar energy. So this is the Earth, our home, and we have been living on this Earth, keeping all these 4 spheres in the balance. But what has happened during the Industrial Revolution is that we found oil, the fossil fuel. In 20th century, called the finding of the century. It has become a very efficient and very effective source of energy for the entire human civilization. It's only for humans, not the other animals or other plants in that matter. So fossil fuel, we used to extract fossil fuel, burn it to run vehicles, to generate electricity, to run industries, everything. And if you look at in the cycles perspective, the spheres perspective, what we have done is we have taken out certain components from the lithosphere and burn it and put it to atmosphere as greenhouse gases, mainly carbon dioxide. So what this has happened kind of a unprecedented manner. So the greenhouse gas emissions, especially carbon dioxide, over the last the 50 years has been phenomenal. It has significantly changed the atmospheric composition, especially carbon dioxide, which has risen from 350 ppm to 420 ppm in the matter of 70 years. What has happened is that now this closed system is trying to find a new balance based on that, because we have changed the composition of the lithosphere and the atmosphere. And we have been living in a kind of an interactive world where the biosphere and the hydrosphere also interacting with the atmosphere and the lithosphere. And we are finding a new the balance. How the world has found this balance is, it has basically keep the atmosphere warm. Temperature is being increased to find this new balance. And that triggered climate change. The climate patterns on the Earth has changed now. Change in a way that we can't predict it anymore, and therefore it has affected the people directly, the life directly, the ecosystems directly, and indirectly to our socio-economic systems as well. So this is the whole gamut of climate change. And as industries, as individuals, as the people, countries, regions, villages, we are facing a threat of facing unknown challenges because of these unknown changes to the climate patterns. So the climate impacts, the climate change impacts, there are basically three clusters of impacts. One is primary impacts. Primary impacts are the changes in the immediate weather patterns, like increased temperatures, drastic changes in the relative humidity, the wind patterns, the precipitation, rainfall, etc. Those are very primary impacts. We can directly see that it happens. Secondary impacts are basically what we see in the ecosystems and in the natural production systems. Because the ecosystems are changing, the rainfall patterns, the plants, the animals, the plants in the sense the agriculture, the crop, the yield has been changing. And it generally affects the entire the cycle of the food chains, etc. And finally, there are tertiary impacts, where the primary and the secondary impacts matters for the entire world, all the fauna, flora, and even the physical, the non-living things as well. But the tertiary impacts is affecting only for humans, where it affects the socio-economic conditions. And that's where actually the people feel the gamut of climate change and the threats and the depth of the climate change impacts, which I'm going to touch upon in my next slides. There are so many impacts. I'm not going to talk all the impacts, but I will touch upon certain things when I'm talking about industries. I've selected one slide. All these graphs have been adopted from the Met Department of Sri Lanka. Recently, Dr. Shiromini Jayawardena has concluded a study, and she has found certain things, and these things are actually reinforcing the previous researches. This is about the heat waves. The heat waves in the sense, in Colombo, how we feel the temperature. You can see over the years, gradually, the heat wave frequency and intensity in Colombo is keep on increasing. So what does that mean? We will have high temperature slots very frequently in Colombo. This is not only for Colombo, basically to other parts of the country as well. So what does that mean? High temperatures. You feel uneasy. You might need air condition at your home. You might definitely need pedestal and ceiling fans more. You need the cooling effects, and sometimes your productivity goes down. Sometimes it might create certain health impacts, and even it might also change your socioeconomic behaviors as well. So this is one example, but there are daunting other findings in this the particular research, including how it affects our water security, rainfall, agriculture, etc. So this is just one impact, but what it said, it's not good. And there are so many things that I can talk with climate change about the impact. I'm not going to details. The extreme weather events, the floods, the droughts, landslides, tornado type winds, sea tidal increase, salinity intrusion to inlands, all these things coming up with landslides. And these are very much of the primary and the secondary impacts. I'm not going to talk about the tertiary impacts, the impacts on your social and economic lifestyles. When it comes to climate change, it's not a local issue, it's a global issue. The entire world is struggling with this, entire world is grappling with this. So for climate change, definitely we need the global efforts. Global collaboration is a must, because we don't have country-specific, region-specific atmospheric fears. We don't have the water cycle that specific for a country. It's for the entire world. So we need to have global collaboration, and the global scientific communities and the policymakers have realized that this is an issue. So they have fueled a specific UN, the convention under this, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC in shortened form, is established in 1990s, especially actually in 1992 under the Rio, the famous Rio Earth Summit. And this is basically to tackle the internationally, the create collaboration and make sure that the human civilization is tackle this new challenge, new threat in an effective and efficient manner. And it's a framework convention. And under the framework convention, of course, you can have different protocols and agreements. And the current most recent agreement is the Paris Agreement, which was adopted in 2015 and started enforcing from 2020. Under the Paris Agreement, we have reinforced the global principle of common but differentiated responsibility. There is a common responsibility across all the countries, across all communities, all subnational governments, regions, districts, villages, whatnot, have a responsibility to mitigate and adapt to climate change. But it's differentiate based on our capacities and our capabilities. For example, the responsibility of USA is quite high because they have a historical responsibility in terms of emissions. At the same time, their country economic capacity is much higher than most of the other developing countries. So they might take a larger responsibility, where Sri Lanka, for example, is a developing country, and we might not have the financial or economic capability as of USA. So we will take responsibility, but not in the same magnitude of USA or any other developed countries. So Paris Agreement is basically going on. So we have taken up national determined targets. So generally in all the other agreements, the countries need to comply with certain things. Most of the time, these targets have been prescribed at the international level. And we basically, or the countries basically comply to that internationally prescribed targets. But under the Paris Agreement, it has gone the other way around. It's a kind of a bottom-up approach where the targets are determined at the national level based on your capacities and capabilities. And we call it national determined contributions. And Sri Lanka also have committed under set of NDCs or national determined contributions. And at the moment, Sri Lankan government is in the process of updating its initial NDC submitted way back in 2015. So going back to the industries component, which is the key component today, the industries is not an exception. All the parts, all the people, all type of living and non-living things are affected with climate change. That's a reality. And so as the industries. So if you look at industries, most of the time, people look at their industrial perspective, their own environment, their internally controlled environment. But actually, most of the impacts are not affecting your core business, the core operations, but mainly for your distal as well as immediate external environment. So the changes in environment is quite phenomenal. And these climate risks must be identified, understood, articulated, and addressed by the industries to make sure that they are sustained, not only their operations, not only their profits, but at the same time, they sustain the industries within the carrying capacity of our ecosystems or world. So, so there are cooperation affected aspects, the value chain or the immediate environment and the broad environment. But for the easiness of understanding what are the implications, I will use this matrix to explain that. So there are direct impacts. Direct impact of climate change, which affects directly to your industry. And there are indirect impacts of climate change, which affects to industries, indirect means. And there are certain impacts which has local exposure. You can feel it. You can see that particular risk is emerging within your immediate environment, locally, within your region, within your country. At the same time, there's another dimension to that, where the exposure is in distal. It's not within your immediate environment, but probably in another country, probably in another continent, probably in another province, which you don't feel at the local level. So if you look at this matrix, there are, in different industries, you might have different combinations of impacts. And this analysis must be done by your company, by your industry, and try to understand, okay, what are the key the impacts. But I have just demonstrated that there are different dimensions, and under these dimensions, you can do that. So I have done a bit of effort to explain the combinations of impacts to industries. So thereby I can tackle what would be the actions that the industries can take to make sure that they're addressing the climate change challenges effectively. In the global perspective, one of the significant direct impact with local exposure is the extreme weather conditions. For example, Sri Lanka, we have been facing for alternate droughts and floods over the last 8 years continuously. These days we are, of course, experiencing the monsoon. The southwestern monsoon has been activated. But if you analyze the rainfall pattern in Sri Lanka over the last 8 years, we got majority quantity of the rainfall in Sri Lanka from extreme weather events. It's not from the predictable, the monsoon and the intermonsoons that we used to have in Sri Lanka. So that means the increase the frequency and the intensity of extreme weather events. It's quite phenomenal, and these have a lot of interruptions to industries. I think some of the industries is facing it right now as well. You have operational interruptions based on rains and droughts, and losses and damages for your physical assets, machinery, and even the increased operational cost for certain matters. For example, if you have drought condition, probably you need to spend more investments towards bringing water for your industrial operations as well as for your workforce, etc. So, so this is quite important. And one of the quite significant change in the extreme weather conditions in Sri Lanka is the high winds or the tornado type winds. If you look at the news currently, you can see there are strong winds that has affected small localities, damaging about 30-40 houses, tree falls, etc. And you see it as a kind of isolated events, but these number of these isolated events are phenomenal. And the Met Department has found out during the last year, the isolated high wind incidents, the number is a staggering 75 plus, because some have not reported to Met Department or the DMC. But the reported numbers are quite staggering. And if you go through the news items, you might be saying, and this might affect the industries as well. Imagine your industrial park is affected such a strong wind, what would be the damages? And the landslides, I don't need to explain. So extreme weather conditions is a highly impactful climate impact on the industries. The water scarcity. Most of the industries need to have water for their industrial operations, either as an input or either for operational purposes. But the water scarcity is now severely affecting. For agriculture-related industries, this is a phenomenal thing. And it might have impacts on goods, impacts on crops, impact of production, and sometimes even on transportation and even health. The water scarcity is not only drought, but at the same time about the quality of water as well. For example, in the coastal belts, we have a significant incidence of salt water intrusion to inland, and which can be attributed to both human activities as the sea level rise, and the quality of water is also matters. If you look at the three maps that I have showed here, these I have adopted from Dr. Ranjit Punyawardana's research. And I must tell, the same research finding has been reinforced and supported by so many other follow-up research as well. So this shows the rainfall pattern changes predicted based on modeling in Sri Lanka. The left corner, the leftmost one is 2020, middle one is 2050, and the extreme right is 2080 figures. And you can see the rainfall pattern change, especially the south and the southwestern part of Sri Lanka is going to have a positive rainfall change, that is more rainfall, whereas almost all the other parts of Sri Lanka is facing a trend that the rainfall, the amount is reducing. This is the annual rainfall. This is not the per rainfall. The intensity increasing is something else. So the model suggests that the southwestern part of Sri Lanka is getting wetter, where the other parts are getting drier, especially the central and the Uva provinces of Sri Lanka is getting drier significantly over the years. So we might have more frequent floods in the areas like Galle, Kalutara, Colombo, Ratnapura, those areas where we might have a lot of incidents of droughts in the areas of Anuradhapura, Polonnaruwa, Badulla, Monoragala, and even Matale and some parts of the Kurunegala as well. So droughts are going to increase. The water scarcity, of course, going to increase. So imagine if you have certain industries in these affected areas, you might have a lot of issues with droughts. So I'm just giving an example. A lot of analysis has been done. So one of the things is that industries need to affect the long-term trends, and they need to make sure that their business operation trends are also adjusted and changed and transformed accordingly. Another direct and local exposure is the energy cost and transition. The energy cost is locally increasing because internationally it's very clear that the fossil fuel prices are going up, and at the same time most of the industries are transitioning for renewable energy switch, as well as new energy efficient measures, and this might have certain cost implications on industries. One, if the grid supplied electricity is too costly, and if that might not help them to compete at the international markets, so definitely they need to switch their energy towards low-cost renewable energy and low-cost energy improvement, energy efficiency improvement aspect. So these are locally felt, and these are direct impacts now as well with the industry, especially those who are in the apparel industry might vouch to and support my ideas on this. Another one is the temperature rise. Imagine the drastic increase in temperature, what it means for a factory, for an industry. The cooling system of your factory needs to change, and the machinery need to change, and the designs need to be improved because the temperature increase. These are the same set of maps done according to the temperature difference. You can see over the years, the trend in Sri Lanka is that the central part of Sri Lanka's temperature is significantly going to be increased. This is annual average temperature, and seasonal, the heat waves are quite a different thing, but generally. So what does that mean? Central part, if you have an industry, so you need to transform your operations and the processes to suit towards a high temperature situation compared to now. So likewise, there are so many, same as with the sea level rise. If your industry is situated along with the coastal belt, it's affected. There's a map scientifically proven how the global sea level rise is happening, and these have been based on the satellite data as well as tidal gauge data. Both have been measured, but it's clear the trend is upwards. So the high tides of the sea wave is going to increase. It's happening very slowly and gradually, but of course it's a reality. So industries based in the coastal belt need to keep eye on this, and we need to have the transformation based on that. So that's a kind of a direct impact with local exposure. And if I go the indirect impact with the local exposure, quite soon, the financial risk. with the climate change impacts, the capital and the investments and the perceived risk by the investors are increasing. They know the climate change is happening, and it creates high frequent and high intensity disaster situations, which might add risk for their investments. So the investors are quite informed. They might not invest on industries which are susceptible for climate change risk, or which are quite open for things. So that the investors know that if the risks are higher, probably the potential returns are also higher. That's a very kind of a rule of thumb in investments. But what happens is, if you see that the potential for high risk, or the gauge of high risk is too much, they might not invest it. So most of the countries in Africa, for example, the industries are facing a lot of troubles because there are a lot of divestments happening from Africa because of the frequent droughts. And even sometimes, if your industry is too much of focusing on fossil fuel, you're also in trouble, because now there are a lot of divestments happening from the fossil fuel, and the fossil fuel investments, fossil fuel drive investments. So that's another risk, and the financial risks are coming up. And we can see that slowly it happened in the Sri Lankan stock market as well, where the investors, the focus are gradually shifting towards the renewable energy and less fossil fuel situations as well. Another one is the rising insurance policies and requirements. Locally, there's no other means. If you are facing with frequent disasters, which has physical losses and damages to your industry, you must go to the insurance. That's a risk management tool you have in the market. But once you're going for the risk insurance, now the insurance prices, the premiums are quite high, increasing, because it's obvious that the climate risk is there. So if you're paying high insurance installments, that means it has certain financial implications on your business and your profitability and your market competitiveness as well. So this is another indirect impact. And you can see when you move into different stages of risk transfer mechanisms, definitely you've been pushed towards the insurance more and more. And when you're pushed towards insurance more and more, when you go to the pools, probably it's not sufficient to you to pool the risk within a country. Probably you need to move out of the countries as well. You need to increase your the risk pools, which is a challenge, and which will have the cost implications on the industries as well. Another indirect impact is the workforce impacts. Some industries have started feeling this already. One is about the workforce migration. You can see some of the people are migrating from different places of countries, especially from the agricultural area, where the climate risk is quite high, and their livelihood risk therefore quite high. And rather than engaging in quite risky livelihood, they tend to migrate to other parts where they have very little climate impacts on their livelihood. This is a migration. This is happening slowly. It's not happening very drastically, but this migration is affecting your workforce. Workforce in different numerics. If you go to the recent ILO study on climate change and labor, it's quite interesting to see how this the migration of labor and migration of workforce affects the regionalization of industries in Sri Lanka. At the same time, health is another issue. The climate change has triggered a lot of health issues, short-term and long-term. Short-term is like incidence of dengue, for example, and the other the waterborne diseases, of course, quite frequent with climate change, and it might affect your workforce indirectly. So that indirect exposure as well. When you come to health, even the scientists have predicted these pandemics or health, the disease outbreaks in the world can be frequent because of the high temperatures. If you look at the history of disease outbreaks, over the last 10 years, we have so many disease outbreaks which might not have taken the attention of Sri Lankans, but globally, the WHO has allowed, raised their eyebrows with that. We had Ebola, we had SARS, we had chikungunya, we have bird flu going on, we had swine flu, and now COVID-19. And all these new disease outbreaks due to new pathogens, new variants of viruses and bacteria and over there, the microorganism happen because of the high temperature. High temperature promotes the quick multiplication of some of the pathogens, and new mutations and new types of diseases can come on, and it will have definitely an impact on industries. You know how it impacted with COVID-19. Imagine if you have those kind of frequent kind of not a pandemic, but probably endemics and even localized diseases might have a lot of impacts indirectly on the industries, and we need to get ready to that. Think of alternative plans, and those are quite challenging, I'm sure. If I move to the other quadrants in the matrix, the direct and distal exposures. Distal in the sense it's not happening in your locality, but out of your locality. One, of course, the value chain aspect, the supply chain disruptions. You know how the pandemic has affected some of the industries because their usual supply chain has been disrupted due to lockdowns, due to travel restrictions, due to logistics disruptions, etc. So the climate change can trigger similar kind of supply chain disruptions in the future, frequently and more intensely. So therefore, some of the global supply chains, especially logistics, might affect transport, etc. Especially, it might reduce the reliability of supplies in terms of the quality as well as quantity. That might have a lot of impacts. I know the garment industry was grappling with the quality of cotton in India a few years back. And even some of the dust storms affected the logistics very recently. If you can remember the ship block in Suez, the canal, because of a dust storm. So those kind of things can be very, very, very frequently, and supply chain disruption can happen. So industries will be forced to diversify their supply chains. They might not be able to rely on one single source of supply. They need to look at alternative multiple supply chains to make sure that they are reducing their rate. Madhusha, you want to tell something? You have raised your hand.
Yeah, Mr. Ranga, acknowledge if you can manage the time a little bit. Like we have to manage three
Let
other
me have about 5 minutes. Yeah,
sure,
let me have
sure.
5 minutes, and then
Sure.
I'll finish it up. Then the market volatility is another one. Market volatility is basically the changes in the demand and supply. Of course, the demand for certain goods and services are quite changing. Now people are not thinking, they're thinking of more of environmental friendly approaches, and it's going as a big sweep across the world. So industries are forced to change their the directions and make sure that they're catering to this the new market. And at the same time, market volatility is quite high, both direct and indirect. Direct in the sense with your supply chain and aspects, but at the same time, the purchasing power of people when they're affected by the frequent and intensified disasters, that might also fell by the industries. Negative perceptions, or basically the reputational risk, is quite high with the climate change. And now there's a lot of reporting in terms of based on your ecological footprint, based on your carbon footprint. They might even threaten to boycott certain things. You know how it happened, and when you go to beach cleaning, you can see naming and shaming of some of the industries based on their plastic pollution is happening now in Sri Lanka. So it might go to climate change as well in the future, and that's quite fun. So that's a matrix that I wanted to give aspect, and even the competition is one. So the regulation is another new thing that the industries might need to keep eye on. There are new international regulations are popping up due to climate change. Some are voluntary, some are mandatory. Some are coming for industry specific or sector specific. Some are coming as a blanket approaches. Sector specific one, of course, there are green labeling aspects. There are, for garments, of course, there are already some of the set standards where the climate change aspects are also integrated. So when these standards are coming up, of course, you need to comply with it. And if you can predict some of the standards that might come up in the market, so you have an upper hand advantage of competing in the markets. And the carbon taxes are quite frequent. And with this, the carbon neutrality, for example, the EU has gone for carbon neutrality by 2050, and based on that, they have put up the Green Deal, and along with the Green Deal, now they are doing this carbon border adjustment mechanism. So basically, they're trying to tax the goods and services based on their carbon emissions, based on the country's carbon emission, basically. So those kind of new regulations coming up. So you need to be in that, and the political risk is also there in terms of migration and the disaster management. I'm not going into that, but what kind of a role that the climate change industries can do? So there are internally the industries can do within your industry certain things that you can do to contribute to the climate action. One is, of course, to climate change mitigation in terms of adapting to renewable energy efficiency aspects, as well as increasing the carbon sources, the forestry and biodiversity aspects. In terms of adaptation, but the adaptation is important. If your industry is adapting highly, it's a contribution to the overall resilience of the country. It's giving secured and resilient livelihood for many people. So adaptation is also important internally. How to do extended risk assessment with the climate change and make sure that each and every climate risk is addressed within your industry. That is quite important, and you need to look at all the trends and forecast for that. Loss and damage management, it's a new normal. You definitely will face more and frequent intensified disasters. So there will be losses and damages. How to manage your losses and damages? If industry have proper systems to manage their losses and damages is there, it's of course contributes to the overall country and world resilience as well. It includes insurance mechanism. It includes retrofitting your industry machinery equipment and the infrastructure as well. At the same time, the industry can do certain external actions which will support your own industry in a way, because it gives an opportunity for industry to learn. At the same time, you make sure that the external environment is resilient so that the negative implication of the external environment is mitigated. One, of course, the engaging in the policy discussions and influencing. For example, in Sri Lanka, the national determined contribution processes happen. I have seen, compared to many other countries, the Sri Lankan industrial participation in this process is very low. Industries have taken very little efforts to understand the national determined contribution, their implications, or providing suggestions to the government. It's not happening. I think it needs to happen. Like the industry is coming up with the solutions or recommendations to the budget, the industries need to do the voluntary and very engagement, the process where you can provide recommendations to the government to come up with good policies, including the NDCs. The leadership of sector-wide standard development. The standards are coming up globally. Rather than you wait the internationally prescribed certain standards, why don't the sectors coming together take the leadership and come up with the voluntary set of standards that you can face climate change challenges, both mitigation and adaptation? Awareness creation and capacity creation is quite important, and some industries are already into it. Awareness creation, not only within your industry, but the external stakeholders, your suppliers, your clients, your customers, your service providers. You need to create their awareness so they know that this climate risk is there. Then your adaptive capacity and the climate mitigation is going up, and building collaboration is much. Without collaboration, it's very difficult that you can work. For that, you have two challenges, I know. One is the awareness level and the capacity level within the industry to do that. Other one is the finance and investments. But for that also you have opportunities in Sri Lankan the businesses. Of course, I have seen very little efforts to tackle to or tap into the climate finance opportunities the globally has. I have seen the industries or the companies trying to do that alone for their particular business, for their particular industry. But unfortunately, based on the size of the market in Sri Lanka, you can't do that. You definitely need a sector-wise collaboration to tap into climate finance opportunities, and you need to go. So there is an increasing trend of having a lot of climate finance globally under concessional terms. Of course, it's really good to see ISB is also stepping forward to support the industries by tapping into the Green Climate Fund and the Adaptation Fund. So those engagement might be really. I'll stop here. In summary, the climate change challenge is a global issue. It's globally, all the industries are affected, and the impacts of climate change is incremental. It's not static. It's keep on increasing, and you need local actions, even though the issue is global. And for that, you need to have both local and global collaborations. So I'll stop there, and probably during the Q&A session, I'll take up more questions from you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Ranga. Hello.
Yes, Madhusha, we can hear you. You can continue.
Okay, I think you can't see me, however. Anyway, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your great explanation and the encouraging words. As natural, always we have to struggle with the time. Okay, and so now, actually, your words were like really encouraging for the industries to move forward as a climate resilience industry. Now we will move to the experience sharing session, where the participants will have more idea on the what is climate resilience industry, what you can actually do as a climate resilience industry, and especially as a country where we are now standing. We will move to the first speaker, who is Ms. Shamodhi Nanayakara. She is the Head of Conservation and Sustainability, Delmati. Shamodhi has studied several disciplines as natural resource management, conservation, human resource management, and business administration. Before joining DILMA, Shamodhi was a member of knowledge management team that engaged community-based biodiversity and climate education and microfinancing initiatives for UNDP, DEF, SGP, and community-based R+ projects. In 2018, she joined DILMA Conservation Climate Change Program, including extensive research at Sri Lanka's first climate change research station, working as a focal point for the stakeholders to collaborate towards understanding climate change and define adaptation strategies. At present, she leads the conservation and corporate sustainability arm of the DILMA Tea Company, as she believes that natural and the culture and inextricably linked with the combined impact and environmental crisis, including climate change. She has served as a volunteer ambassador for the International Center for the Preservation and Restoration of Cultural and Natural Property since 2016. Shamodhi, it's over to you.
Thank you, Madhusha. I hope that I'm audible and also you guys can see me. So without further ado, let me share my screen quickly. Okay. So actually, before jumping to my presentation, I would like to bring some statistics. So it is stated that by 2050, we might have to feed the 9.8 billion population. We have to produce 70% of agriculture, more agricultural produce than we produce today. So we all know it's going to be a little bit tricky because agriculture is one of the most affected sectors by climate change, and it's evident. And today, so because of that, I'm trying to share or create a discussion using our own as an industry which is in agricultural, value-added agricultural produce and manufacturing, DILMA's involvement, trying to bring some impactful discussion and some thoughtful process research into climate arena in agriculture. And also our intention is to gather some updates and knowledge from using this as a platform. I think Ranga, you've been an amazing, that was an amazing keynote delivery. Certainly I got updated on many elements on the current trends and so on and so forth. So for thank you for that insights. So to talk about DILMA T's efforts, we take it, right. So the actions that we do, or the climate work that we do, are majorly threefold: climate action, climate research, climate education. So climate action, actually, it is mostly towards the internal actions that we do within the industry premise, also linking other companies that within the same group, also our supply chain, the plantation community, who will directly get impacted on tea and related that agricultural fields. So, and the climate research is majorly conducted and taken care of by our dedicated environmental arm, DILMA Conservation. And DILMA Conservation link up the communities, their livelihoods, and other elements that normally you have to deal with when you're talking about climate research and other climate studies. And climate to do climate education, also our philanthropic entity, Merrill J. Fernando Foundation, also get together in empowering the communities. So the economic side and the sustainability, the climate impacts, climate education, empowering is everything. The environmental side and the social side, all these pillars have been integrated into our business strategy as a business priority, because we are in a business that is born from agriculture. So getting it integrated into our business strategy is one of the winning points throughout our journey, trying to address the risks, addressing our business risk. One of that is climate change over the past decade. So first, I will quickly walk you all through some initiatives that cross-cutting through all these initiatives that I said, a combination of all three actions, to be honest. So first is the One Earth Climate Change Center. Most of y'all in the audience might have known or might have heard about this. We established a dedicated research center, welcoming all sort of stakeholders, to global to national, academic people, scientists, researchers, other corporates, other plantation companies, the volunteers, the youth groups, students, everybody's welcome to use the center. And we facilitate that. This is the first corporate-led, fully corporate-led, dedicated climate change research center. And the key research areas, obviously, that is being conducted using the center are precipitation trends, trying to develop models to predict the crop yield. Those are actually dealing with lots of data. So still, those are long-term research, and trying to create awareness, of course, and models to predict the carbon sequestration, soil carbon. And of course, last but not least, deriving climate smart agricultural techniques and educating on them. So far, as Ranga very correctly mentioned, that he shared his insight, climate change is not a local scenario. It's globally felt. It's happening globally. The impacts are on globally. So I'm very happy that he gave that insight, and to know that we might be little bit working towards the right direction. So we have, out of the 16 research projects, we have 3 global studies that the site has been the Sri Lankan center point for these 3 global studies. For an example, we are part of the global study that is measuring the changes of the global nitrogen, the atmospheric nitrogen fluctuations, and how it affects on aggravating or depriving the climate actions and how it impacts on crops, yields, and other agricultural factors. And we have collaborated short-term and long-term basis with 7 different countries, trying to share this education and trying to get the expertise, the knowledge, and also a global focus to what's happening in and out in Sri Lanka with another 7 countries. This is some of the other research that we do. We are trying to come up with climate adaptive crop management packages, where we are at the moment we are doing the plot trials. It is not industry scale, but within another 3 years the research would be completed, and we are really happy to share the details and everything about it, so that this could be replicable, hopefully. And I'm not going to go into the scientific or the chemistry side of it, because of the time constraints. And one of the other things that Dilma, what we believe, one of the limitations in climate research or predicting models and things like that is the data availability on different geographic locations. So to strengthen up that, we have started a project in 2019 to establish weather stations. So far, we have very small amount of weather stations, out of which anybody who wants to access those data, it is freely available. And we share that with global research that we do, and also students and local, whoever the entities who wants to use this. And we have a plan to multiply it in a larger scale. And we will gradually do that, trying to finish the aim by 2030. And also, what as I earlier also mentioned, climate change, when it comes to that, it aggravates other elements of an ecosystem as well, like biodiversity. When you talk about it, it connects to everything and everybody. Everything is about climate change these days. So when you talk about biodiversity, one of the things is that the population is affected by the recent climate change. Or even you talk about women empowering, one of the factors that UN talks very recently in a very prominent manner, the climate crisis and impact on the women. So taking those things into mind, we have always trying to link our other research projects and other work that we do, so to speak, of the Endana Nature Corridor, which initially started as a biodiversity program. The concept is to link two corridor patches, fragmented forest patches. One is located in Singaraja, outer skirt of Singaraja forest patch, which was century ago like fragmented due to the monoculture tea plantation. We are trying to build a corridor so that it will support the biodiversity of in and around that and facilitate as a corridor. So while doing that, we actually started profiling the soil carbon changes while we are constructing the corridor. So since it's looking good, we would hope that it would at least around a certain level of hectares around the corridor, it will have an impact on the soil carbon. So we will keep on monitoring this. And because the results are looking good, we have actually started replicating this, not as a forestry corridor, but in a different concept. We call it green recovery mechanism, but the similar principles, reforestation between the tea lands, so that it will enrich the soil profile, soil carbon in other estates of Kahavatta plantation. That's one of the group belongs to a company. So talking about Kahavatta, Dilma Conservation specially intrinsically working with them for a long time on renewable energy and other projects. So KWPL, Kahavatta Plantation, has initiated their own rainwater restoring program, storing program and using program in Upper Kahavatta estates. So this you can see they're using the roof runoff collection and earthen dams and constructed ponds, so on and so forth, to use in the plantation, because we think rainwater harvesting is one of the very primary but a very impactful climate solution, climate smart solution, that you can do it in your home as well. And not only in Kawata plantation, we have rainwater harvesting and using facility in our main processing factory in Colombo, and also in other centers that Dilma Conservation and Foundation operates in Calcutta, in Moratuwa, and we educate on rainwater to general public, the students and the locality that we're dealing with in those specific areas. And this is also one of the things, because to go back to about some of the statistics I mentioned when I'm starting my presentation, out of the 9.8 billion population, it's predicted by 2050, 68% will be urban dwellers. So urban dwellers, cities, that means cities. Cities, we all know, are inversely proportional to agriculturable land. So that's why we have started now promoting vertical farming through hydroponics and aquaponics. Aquaponics, actually, we promote that as a DIY, like do-it-yourself projects to general public communities who comes to our organic farms, educational organic farms, and we teach them how to do it. And we also we have also initiated the hydroponics, and we are trying to soil-less farming. We are trying to scale it up by 2030 in a larger scale. The work, it is a work in progress. So to talk about organic gardening, coming out of tea, this is part of Dilma Conservation and Foundation. We actually work with the plantation communities and other vulnerable communities, such as in Eastern Province and all, to promote home gardening, which is organic. That is an indirect mechanism of coping with the climate crisis. And another climate action, coming back to tea and our main business, we are a carbon neutral company. Our entire premise and also our entire product range is carbon neutral. So we started that in 2017, and by 2020, what we have done is we have actually calculating our carbon footprint. We thought it is way of accepting that we are emitting carbon and we are responsible of part of adverse in climate change impact, maybe in a minute way, but we are one of those industries. So we all do that. Even as an individual, moment you breathe out, you contribute to that. But as a corporate, we have a larger responsibility to, rather than accepting it, to act on it. So that's why we started this carbon neutralizing. And every year we have enhanced the scope. It started as within the premise, and it elevated to from our garden to our gate. Now it is from the garden to to every country's port, which is the level that which we can control. After that, it's consumers. But we do a lot of post-consumer campaigns, how to reduce the carbon footprint when you're making a cup of tea. But our newest target for 2030 is to become carbon negative within our industry premise operations. So for that, we are actually, at the moment, we own solar power in a like 850 kilowatts. So far, we have sequestrated equal, like you may say sequestrated or reduced 2,300 tons equivalent to carbon dioxide through this. And this is our plan for 2030 to increase it by around 120% of what we currently consumes for electricity within our main building. And there are also some other actions coming, looking like this, like the forestry, especially the forestry, which I think I mentioned previously. Also in Huluela, we have started the second stage, and using our abandoned non-agriculturable degraded soil patches through reforestation. So that creates a win-win. That creates a win-win for biodiversity and the soil profile, the business sustainability plus mitigating our carbon footprint as well. And also what we are doing, one of the other actions that we do is changing into circular design, circular economy, circular design when it comes to business operations. So we try to minimize our waste. Whatever which is remaining, we try to use it, pump it back into our production cycle, or use it otherwise. So tea waste, tea waste will be converted into biochar with a 52% of yield. This, with the plot test, about 100 acres in Kawada plantation, we have applied as biochar. We are trying to scale it up because the production process is a little tricky. We are trying to scale it up. So out of the 100 acres, we have observed that there's a 50% reduction in fertilizer application, and biochar is a one-time application. When you apply it for one time, you can use it like the tree. Once the tree is like for 100 years and more. So 42% of increase in the yield, that is what we have observed. And I will, so we're using the waste as a resource for education. All our educational organic farms have been constructed using the waste of our production site. And we also use waste as a capacity building tool as well. I'm gonna skip it because, so yeah, talking about the external factors that external work that we do, we work with very vulnerable communities like East for climate change. So there we have selected farmers because dairy is a very prominent industry there. Also, dairy is one of the highest carbon footprint. So we are actually training them to adapt into very sustainable, low resource, with a low emission factor, high dairy model. We call it 3-cow unit. So this is one of the, Hema is one of the ladies who have just realized that while what we're trying to show to this vulnerable community is that not only you are reducing the carbon footprint or the impact you give to the environment, but also it will provide you a better income, more organized, more better yield with better income. So for her, after reorganizing her things, it gives her additional 30,000 income per month because she's managing her waste, she's managing her raw material input, and she's doing limited amount of like using CO4 grass and then hybrid varieties that with higher yields, things like that. So that is nothing to do with, but this is something that we do, as Ranga mentioned, the external communities, trying to empower them. And plus, we did a 10-year program to plant 10 million cashew plants in the East. We selected cashew because there's not much tree going in the East. That can also also for the communities. So we took a long time to do this because actually we're not thinking of the 1 million achieving the 1 million trees goal. We were very much focusing on the survival rate of the planted trees. So right now the farmers are actually harvesting the cashew, and every year this project is pumping more than 2 billion rupees into each economy. And last section is climate education. So far, over the past 4 years, we have educated directly and indirectly 25,000 plus individuals throughout our education program. This started in 2018 with the climate reality, threats and opportunities. Yes, threats and opportunities of climate change. The series actually had national and international expertise and scientists on climate research and entrepreneurs who have experience and who have successful case studies using climate change as an opportunity or how to deal with the threats. And so far, for these 3 years, every month we have continued this series with a lecture, workshop, or some kind of an event or activity, keeping up the dialogue, keeping up the conversation. And one of the things that we did was introducing Climathon, the international platform, to Sri Lanka. That's like developing solutions for cities, those that are vulnerable to climate change. We picked, we did that with several other partners, but Dilma was the technical partner for that. And we actually dealt with the Jaffna community, deriving solutions and empowering youth groups, young innovators to think out of the box, deriving climate solutions. So that was this global competition was in 113 cities at that year, 2019. And we, as what I'm doing today, we always make sure to do a transparent data sharing, transparent experience sharing as much as possible, so that both parties will learn from each other as climate beating climate crisis or adapting to that is a collective effort, as we all know. So we represent in many other international and national platforms readily and in a very transparent manner. And beyond that, we also try to create collective efforts where the corporate groups get together in places like United Nations Global Compact and Biodiversity Sri Lanka. Biodiversity Sri Lanka actually now have, I think, 98 and 68 of patron corporate members. It was seeded. I think Madhusha is raising hand. I think I need to stop now. Give me 1 minute, Madhusha, I'll be done. Okay. Biodiversity Sri Lanka was seeded with Dilma Conservation, IUCN, and International Chamber of Commerce. So it is now empowered with so many corporates. So wherever we get a chance, we share our lessons learned with those groups. They do the same, and we learn from each other and try to invest in collective efforts in whether it's biodiversity or whether it's mitigating climate change. So that is what I wanted to highlight as my last slide, that collective effort is the best way to address, and international effort, and what we are trying to address is a very difficult task, but together addressing the SDG 17 partnership for goals to move forward. So thank you so much, everyone, and good evening. Madhusha, over to you.
Yeah, Shamali, thank you very much for the interesting presentation. So I hope we could have more time, but always we have to struggle with this time management. Well, now soon we will move to the next speaker, who is the Danuji Jayapala. Danuji is the Manager Environmental Sustainability at the Central Sustainability Team of MAS. He has been engaging in environmental sustainability for MAS for more than 10 years, working primarily on energy efficiency, renewable energy, and circularity. He's a graduate of the Faculty of Engineering of University of Peradeniya. In his current role at MAS, Danuji is focused on achieving MAS long-term emission targets and value enhancement. He is interested in product life cycle assessment, EV features, and carbon capture and storage techniques. Over to you, Danuji.
Thank you, Madhusha. I'll share my screen. Good evening, everyone. First of all, thank ISB for giving the opportunity for me to present about the climate smart initiatives that's happening in MAS. Here I'll briefly take you through about climate smart initiatives we are doing and why we are doing it actually, right? Yes. So if you look at the global requirement, in 2015, United Nations set up 17 requirements and for humanity. So number 13 is climate action, together with many things which are binding together. So they are known as Sustainable Development Goals. And then Ranga covered this part brilliantly, but just in summary, from 2800 to 2100, that is from pre-industrial to now, we have been increasingly emitting greenhouse gases, which is going to rise to in the future as well. So the temperature rise we are predicting is about 4 to 6 degrees, which is marked on this graph. And like Ranga said, in 2015, the Paris governments in the Paris Agreement, governments agreed to cut down emissions, but that is only going to solve the problem 50%. And the rest is actually on the industries to keep the global warming under 2 degrees. So this is the Time magazine cover of March 2021. Like mentioned in here, the world is crossing long-awaited political tipping point on climate change right now. So this is from Algo, which means we need to act now. If you see in the graph is predicting so much increase, and even if we try to be negative, we will not have, we will only be able to mitigate at least about 1.5 degrees. So looking at the fashion industry as in general, we can roughly estimate the global emissions of the fashion industry for about 4 degrees. And under what we're seeing now, which is majority of its partners are actually setting up climate targets, still we are about to miss the requirement by about 50%. So which means about within the next 30 to 40 years, about 50 to 60% of the global emissions on the apparel industry needs to be cut down. If you look at global companies, basically set themselves up on different levels. You can be the last one standing, basically let everybody else do the work, and you can move as the last one. You can be a slow follower, basically in making the majority do the work, and when the things are working, you will also move. And then you be a fast follower, see the top 10% moving, and think that's the right way to go. And you can also be a leader, which means you will take action in a leadership way and be a role model for the entire industry. So that's the path I think the fashion industry needs to make. And in the fashion industry, there's something called global, the Climate Pact by the fashion industry that has come together. So they're talking about mainly 3 things: climate, biodiversity, and oceans. They have 3 specific targets on that, which is climate on cutting down absolute emissions, biodiversity, developing individual biodiversity blueprints and support zero deforestation, and oceans, eliminating problematic and unnecessary plastic packaging and ensure at least half of the plastic packaging is 100% recycled. So these are the main things the fashion industry is looking at as a priority. So as MAs, we have set a target, like Ranga asked, the industry needs to put themselves. So this is a voluntary target. We are committing to Science-Based Targets Initiative, which is completely voluntary, and which talks about absolute emissions reduction. So we are committing to 25% absolute emissions reduction. When you talk about absolute emissions reduction, it means that regardless of the growth, you set a base year, which for MAs is 2019, and you will reduce 25% of that. Obviously, if you understand when you grow a business, and I think this applies for many businesses in Sri Lanka, which is a developing economy. So businesses will grow in few folds during the next decade. So this is a really challenging task for us. So we'll next see what the actions we are taking on ends which are directly linked with emissions, and also linked with other things which are indirectly combating climate challenges. So the main thing to combating climate challenge is renewable energy. So over the years from 2010 to 2020, we are grown our renewable energy footprint from 12% to 59%. So majority of this is coming from biomass, and others are coming from rooftop solar and biogas. I think most of the people here are energy experts. So I'll go to how it's actually coming, the numbers are making up. So if you look at the total energy pie of MA, so 54% of energy is actually from biomass, about 5 to 6% is from solar. And if you look at the solar, so we started in 2008, which was the first installation with 25 kilowatts at MA's Intimates Thuruli plant. But since 2013, our commitment has become very serious. And by now we have completed roughly about 18 megawatts. And during the next 2 years, we are planning to go for about another 10 more megawatts, which is taking roughly about 30 megawatts of solar. So in kilowatts, it will be 30,000 kilowatts. All these are just rooftop installations, and probably we'll go into ground mounted installations where globally where our sites are allowing it. Yes, so moving away from direct energy side, we are working a lot with biodiversity. So our target is to restore biodiversity by 100 times the space we occupy. We are currently working on 45 habitat restoration projects across Sri Lanka. So already we have covered 22,000 plus acres. And also we have covered the aerial reforestation project, which captured the eye of many local enthusiasts. So talking about aerial reforestation project, we worked with Sri Lanka Air Force, Forest Department, and University of Peradeniya in the initial concept, and we still get their support. And we did 3 trials on this. Latest in this January, covering another 67 acres. So if you look at the growth on our forest acres restored, which is the parameter we are going by. So since we started this in end of 2016, so since 2017 to 2020, we have covered 2,000 acres. And even during pandemic, which we had a serious business impact, we were able to still cover about 400 acres in that area. So another big thing for us is oceans protection. So since again, I think 2016, we have been working with Sri Lanka Navy in small projects, and we were doing beach cleanups and collection points across the country. And in the last year, April, we were able to put the oceans trainer. And also we did, we'll talk about them in detail on next slides. So the oceans trainer was put up on the Dehiwala Canal, which will capture all suspended or floating debris that's going through the lake. So last year, roughly about within 4 months, we were able to capture about 30 tons of waste. These are all last year, but we had rains within the last 4 weeks or so. So we are roughly collecting about 2 truckloads of waste per day due to the heavy rains and whatever the washovers that are coming. Which is really bad indication of how people are managing plastic and polythene waste. Talking about the waste, because we got few numbers, we got the chance to analyze it, and pet waste is becoming a huge number by weight, is representing roughly about 14%. Yeah. So what we thought was we worked with Veda Group since I think we've been talking to them since 2017. We were able to make the Sri Lanka's National Cricket World Cup T-shirt from completely from waste collected in Sri Lanka. So this is valuable in many senses, because I think as an industry, one of the biggest challenges we have is we don't have raw materials to make polyester, which is a crude oil base. So this company, Bera Group, was able to convert PET, basically PET waste, back into yarn. Then we converted it to a T-shirt, and we took this story into public as much as possible. So on performance-wise and any other parameter-wise, this is basically identical to a virgin polyester, which is great innovation work that Sri Lanka was able to generate. And yes, and finally, our what we want is our planet change for good. We want to make sure we leave our planet better than we found it. And as Amaze's motto says, change is courage. And I think together we can make change, because Amaze or any company individually, everybody in here are doing great things, but individually it would not make a difference. It needs to be done together. So we invite everybody to make and be part of this change. Thank you.
Thank you, Danuji. Thank you very much for the interesting presentation. And we'll soon move to the next presentation. Yeah, Danuji, thank you very much. And the next presentation is by Ms. Shashika Kaluahewa. She's joining Jetwin family in 2013. Shashika is currently functioning as the Assistant Manager Sustainability of Jetwin Group, overlooking the many environmental sustainability initiatives of the brand, such as coordination of hotel level implementation of initiatives and performance analysis, sustainability practices, among others. A first-class graduate from the University of Kelaniya with a BSc in Environmental Conservation and Management. She has read for her Masters in Environmental Management from the University of Colombo. Shashika, it's over to you.
Hi, everyone. A good evening to you all. When it comes to tourism, it is a sector both which can be impacted by very severely from climate change impacts, but also an industry who can affect climate change as well, especially given the long distance travels and the inherent carbon footprint attached to it. Within the tourism sector, today I'll focus on hospitality or the accommodation sector, and give you a few examples of what Jetwin Hotels have been doing. A brief introduction to us, for those who might not know us. We're a hospitality company, a local hospitality company who's been in the industry for over 47 years. We own and manage 33 properties across Sri Lanka. Sustainability is a big part of who we are. It's something we've believed in since the beginning, and we've tried to integrate into our business in our journey. When it comes to sustainability, we've kind of looked at a holistic framework and come up with a sustainability strategy which has 6 focus areas based on our impact on both the environment and the community and the people. When it comes to climate action, of course, the interests are represented in one focus area, energy and carbon, where we are looking at mitigation mostly, emission reduction through innovation and tenacious efforts. But there are a few other areas also which impact climate change and mitigation, emission mitigation, which I'll come to. This is what the energy map of Jetwin Hotels looks like now. Yeah,
Shashika, sorry for interrupting. I think better if you could be a little bit loud.
Okay, sorry. This is what the energy map of Jetwin Hotels looks like right now. So we are at about 60% renewable energy, and most of this energy is coming from biomass. So biomass in our hotels is used for boilers. Typically, boilers in hotels are diesel, but we use biomass, and these boilers produce hot water, steam for the laundries. And in our case, we have few hotels where it's used as a heat source for air conditioning as well. What's unique about the type of biomass we use is that we use cinnamon wood. So this has a few advantages or benefits. One, in terms of environment, this doesn't contribute to deforestation. Uh, it is not grown as a fuel wood, so it's a lot more efficient in terms of resource use. And thirdly, it's a sustainable fuel wood because it has very short cropping cycle or growth cycle. So any carbon which is emitted can be reabsorbed in plant growth within a very short period of time. It also has technical advantages. It has a relatively high calorific value. When it comes to sustainability, it's not just about the environment, it's about the people as well. And this particular initiative is important because if you know what the cinnamon industry, how the cinnamon industry works, it is that they take the bark of the tree and the stem or the wood of the tree is actually a waste product or a byproduct. And what we are doing is we're actually buying this waste product or byproduct from these farmers. So essentially, we are providing them an additional income and contributing to the upliftment of the local supply chain. I mentioned the air conditioners, which are run from renewable energy. These are vapor absorption chillers. So unlike the compression chillers, which are generally using an electrical input, the chilled water is produced through a heat source in these chillers. And the heat source for the chillers we have in our hotel, the vapor absorption chillers, is steam. And the steam is generated from the biomass boilers. So essentially, the chillers are run primarily through renewable energy. When it comes to renewable energy, we also use solar energy. So one is for hot water generation. So during daytime, we'll be using solar thermal panels. During the nighttime, we'll be using the biomass boilers. We also use solar PV or electrical systems. And so most of our hotels now have solar PV systems, and these are varying capacities. The largest units we have are of 300 kilowatts. One is at Japing Yala, and in 2014, when this was commissioned, it was actually Sri Lanka's largest privately held system. The other unit is at Japing Lake, and this unit again is a little bit has a unique feature, which is that it uses bifacial panels, meaning it generates electricity from both sides, or the underside and the top side of the panel, which is why you see a white reflective surface on the ground there. And these units contribute about 30 to 35% of the total electricity requirement of the hotels. We've also looked at how we can use renewable energy in our kitchens. So particularly in our staff cafeterias, we've tried to find alternatives for LPG. And one of it is through biogas cooking stoves. So the biogas itself is generated on site, or wood stoves, which are also using cinnamon wood. When it comes to carbon emissions, an area we don't talk very much about is refrigerants. But given that refrigerants are far more potent in terms of the global warming potential than carbon dioxide or methane, phasing out climate unfriendly refrigerants can be a very impactful step in our journey. And we have looked at how we can transition into low GWP refrigerants. One of it is through the vapor absorption chillers I mentioned earlier. In addition to being powered by renewable energy, the refrigerant use is also different. So instead of chlorinated or fluorinated refrigerants, the refrigerant here is demineralized water. Another area we're looking at, particularly in our newer hotels, is for the air conditioners, the room air conditioners, replacing the R410 refrigerant with R32s, which is about just one third of the alternative. When it comes to energy and carbon, it's not just about transitioning into renewable energy, but how we can improve our energy efficiencies as well. And where we can particularly use this is in the design and concept stage of our hotels. So in our newer properties, this has been a feature we've looked at. We have two very good examples. One is at Japing Kaduruketha, that is the image on the left. So this is in Vallavaya. This property features a lot of traditional architecture and natural material. The property on the right is Jetwing Surf on the East Coast. This again utilizes a lot of natural material and design features. Both of these hotels, the guest rooms don't have air conditioners. So for a hotel, the air conditioning takes up about 50 to 60% of the energy requirement or electricity requirement. And energy and electricity is the largest contributor to our emissions. So by taking out air conditioners, it creates a significant impact in bringing down our carbon footprint. Although these two hotels don't have air conditioners, these are one of our higher end hotels. And so kind of showing that being responsible and sustainable and conscious doesn't have to compromise on the experiences offered in hotels. Moving to a little bit of a different area, in addition to energy, where our emissions come for hotels, the other area is through our waste management. So both liquid and solid waste. And in terms of treating it and responsibly discharging it, we can reduce our emissions there as well, particularly in organic waste and specifically in food waste, which hotels tend to generate a lot of through our kitchens and restaurants. So in our hotels, we look at it in two ways. One is through biogas generation. So we have biogas digesters within our hotel premises, and the food waste and sometimes sludge from the effluent treatment plants are fed into these biogas digesters. And the gas generated is then used as an alternative for LPG in cooking in the staff cafeterias, as mentioned before. The other way through composting. So this is mainly for garden waste. Hotels also tend to have extensive land areas and landscaped areas. And so most of the garden waste, all of the garden waste and some of the food waste is fed into these composters. These are sometimes modified windrow composters or the traditional above ground composters. And the product compost is used as a nutrient-rich soil enhancer back in our hotel gardens or farms. When it comes to liquid waste or wastewater, we treat that as well. So it's treated biologically without the use of chemicals. And the treated water is used for different purposes like garden irrigation and for flushing and for cooling towers, etc., which don't require high quality water. This addresses two problems. One, of course, you're reducing the pollutant load, but also from the other angle, you're looking at an alternative freshwater source, meaning that especially this is important with climate change and the changes we might be seeing in the water availability in area and where you need to find alternative sources of fresh water. Moving again to a different area of biodiversity, I think all of us are aware about the role forests play in carbon or emission mitigation. And this is not a Jetwing project, this is a collaborative project initiated by Biodiverse Sri Lanka and several other private sector partners, where they're looking at a not just a tree planting, but beyond that, restoring a forest land so that it can perform the ecosystem service as a national forest is. There's a land adjacent to the Karnalia Reserve. And this project, Jetwing Hotels, have been supporting for the past few years and will be contributing in the next 2 years as well. Lastly, of course, sourcing and production, which can have an impact on our carbon footprint and emissions. So hotels are very intricate and complex supply chains, and given that we are also spread across the island, we have a wide network of suppliers as well. So one of the ways we can reduce our impact within the supply chain is through prioritizing local sourcing, meaning whatever the products and services we require, we purchase as local as possible. So this, of course, reduces our carbon footprint from transport, but also has a secondary or additional benefit that the money is going back to the communities. So it's not being sent out to the region or the country, but it's going back to the immediate host communities. Another way we are looking at it is through internalizing the supply chain, meaning we produce what we can within the hotels. As part of our plastic waste management, we have taken out or we have replaced PET bottles with glass water bottles. And we have taken that a step further, and these glass bottles are made within our hotels itself. We have six bottling plants in strategic locations, and these plants are able to purify the water and fill the bottles and kind of cyclically have that process going so that you're not having any plastic waste, but also we've taken out the emissions from transporting these glass bottles or water bottles, which tend to come from specific areas of the country in the Western Province or in the highlands. And also within our hotels, wherever we have space, we have tried to farm them and kind of supplement our vegetable, fruit or herbs requirement as well. And this farming is done organically. And meaning what we use here is either the compost we produce within the site, or sometimes the slurry from the biogas, which is also coming with a lot of nutrients. When it comes to organic farming, why it's important from a climate point of view is that the nitrogen emissions, the nitrogen oxide emissions, nitrous oxide emissions are directly related to the nitrogen fertilizers which are added to agricultural land. And if we can take that synthetic part out and look at ways of the traditional ways of nutrient management, like returning the crop residues or crop rotation, we can reduce our emissions as well. When it comes to organic farming, the best example we have is Jeffing Kadruketa. This is in Valavaya. So there's 60 acres of land there, of which 50 is paddy land. And this paddy land has been traditionally farmed for many years, conventionally using chemicals. And in 2018, we started converting this to an organic cultivation, and especially utilizing traditional farming practices for nutrient management and pest control. And the product we get there is now organic certified. And as going a little bit further, we've also started using or repopularizing heritage varieties. Sri Lanka has a lot of traditional or heirloom rice varieties, which has gone out of favor. But these rice varieties are a lot more suited for our environment and actually require less input as well. So in terms of things like weedicides, we don't actually have to use it if you're growing these varieties, and you can reduce the impact both on the soil and the water, and also from a fertilizer point of view, the climate as well. So those are a few examples of what we are doing. And yeah, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Sarshika. Thank you very much for your interesting presentation. Okay, now we are running out of time, but we have a few questions, and we have found many questions from Ranga. So I will ask one by one. Ranga, I think you're there, and I just ask the questions. This is from Utpala. Ranga, you have mentioned about the Green Deal that EU will impose tax based on emissions. Will that be applicable to industries that import to EU? In that case, do you think Sri Lankan industries are ready for it?
The rationale there is like EU is going to be carbon neutral. So therefore, they will impose certain restriction for the EU industries to invest on renewable energy and cut down on their emissions. And even they will force the industries that who might not be able to cut their emissions within their industry to offset it by purchasing carbon credits from the other countries. So that means the cost of production in the EU is going up. So if you are importing products where the carbon taxing or any other carbon pricing is not available, so they might not be able to compete with those products. So they want to make sure that the market is equal, and also what you call the concept called carbon leakage is not there. Yes, of course, there will be implications on Sri Lankan trade. They will roll out the Green Deal from this year, but it will go kind of a sector by sector basis. So I think there will be a plan. And I'm definitely sure the industries, those who are exporting goods and services from Sri Lanka to EU, need to keep eye on that. And it's not only EU, it seems both Canada and the USA is also now planning carbon border adjustment mechanism as a way of make sure that the trade are regularized and the trade is not being, their local industries are not being marginalized. So definitely the Sri Lankan industry, industries need to go gradually go to carbon neutrality. And at the same time, Sri Lanka as a country also need to move towards carbon neutrality as soon as possible. So it's a process that transformation need to happen. And but unfortunately, our industries, all the industries are not ready. But it's encouraging to see some of the industries, especially the large-scale industries. You might have seen the presentations from Dilma and MAS that they are moving towards, and even tourism sector. You have certain positive examples, but what we need to do is that we need to scale it up and make sure that we are running towards that.
Yes, thank you, Ranga. And again, it's from you. What is the state of, this is from Sachira. What is the state of climate change mitigation in Sri Lanka? Is it prominent or there is no any linkage with the current situation?
I didn't get the questions very well. Can you repeat it, please?
What is the state of climate change mitigation in Sri Lanka? Is it prominent or there is no any linkage with the current situation?
Unfortunately, Sri Lanka climate change mitigation, we have not been paying that much of attention, thinking that our carbon emission is not very very strong one, and we have very little carbon emission, but we need to move towards that. If you look at the prominent carbon emission sectors, of course, transport and energy are the top. So we need to focus on that. We need to move towards. I think there are certain initiatives, but unfortunately, those initiatives are not in par with the global demand as of now. So we need to do that transition.
Okay. Now there's another question from Maljini Disanaika. How it indirectly affects soil-less farming and organic farming to climate change?
It's a very subjective statement. It's very difficult to say whether the soil-less farm going for less carbon emission, but there are possibilities. Of course, the case studies are there, but definitely the organic farming, of course, the carbon emission is less because the amount of the carbon attached to the fertilizer is less when it goes to organic. It's basically with the value chain of the fertilizer production. For fertilizer production, there's a huge the carbon emission is attached, and organic farming can be reduce that emission. Of course, it's there, but soilless, of course, it's a very relative terms from my understanding, because sometimes there is a good case study from France where they have gone for hydroponics because of the less area. They were thinking that the urban the farming will reduce the food transportation cost, but unfortunately, their energy related emissions have been significant there. So it's very relative. You need to do a proper assessment of the emission profiles of your process. But of course, it's a possibility. I don't negate that there's no possibility of reducing emissions from soilless cultivation.
And another important question, does Sri Lanka have a climate financing mechanism helping industries to meet national targets?
I think national targets probably the meaning is there is the industry related, the national determined contributions. Of course, industry is one of the sectors where we are planning to reduce the business as usual emissions totally by 5%, along with waste and the transport sectors as well. As of now, there's no locally available financing mechanism apart from some of the privately available financing mechanism from different sectors. For example, we now have a financing tool for rooftop solar, which was financed from the Asian Development Bank. But apart from that, it's not available. But Sri Lanka, as far as I know, the bankers in Sri Lanka have got together along with the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, and they have developed what you call sustainable financing the framework. And there's a commercial bank, private sector commercial bank collective called Sustainable Financial Initiative, and they have done a roadmap how the local banks can develop a financing mechanism that can support not only industries but also the other sectors towards sustainable and green financing. But internationally, of course, there are opportunities available. What we need to do is that the local financing, the agencies need to work in collaboration with the central bank and other the authorities to make sure that the international financing opportunities are streamlined, including the Green Climate Fund.
Okay, Ranga, there's another question. What is your reflection on SMEs' contribution or the role to climate change? Development sector initiatives focus more support to resilience of SMEs, while it is not proportionate the negative impacts of bigger industries. How can we balance this equation? Ranga, are you clear?
I think it's a good question. It's about how the SMEs need to why on one hand SMEs are very important to the economy because they make sure that the income distribution, or what you call the equity aspect of the economy, is maintained, so that the larger portions are not going for the larger industries. But at the same time, the emission level must not be large as the big industries. But at the same time, they need to make sure that they also need to green, and they have so many other challenges how to do that. That equity balancing is quite important. And at the international level, this is also being discussed very well, and Sri Lanka, being part of the UNFCCC negotiations on climate finance, has also putting certain recommendations there. And knowing this, now internationally there are some windows are being opened up for, especially for micro and small enterprises. But the thing is, those are not 100% operationalized as of now. It's in the process, and we need to have certain institutional mechanisms towards that, including having accredited entities to access those finance. As of now, the government of Sri Lanka is engaging with some of the entities to act as fund managers and obtain the accredited to access finance, including ISB. Of course, I know we are also working on that, and some of the banks, including a few commercial banks, are working on it. So we are rolling out that process. But my personal understanding and my personal idea is that we need to push that little further rather than taking much time. We have very little time, and the COVID-19 has added some additional pressure to our economy, especially SMEs. So we need to make sure that we push it out and we support the SMEs to access those finance as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you. And there is another question for Dhanuji. Dhanuji, I think you can hear me.
Yes, go ahead.
Dhanuji, how MS uses supply chain management or internal processes or operations to minimize the impact of climate change?
So, I mean, there are a lot of initiatives happening, but since of the limited time, I didn't get into those. So what's internally happening is, since 2010, since we started this journey, there was a lot on energy management, water management, waste management, all of these happening. So talking about some of those basics, like energy efficient chillers, to lighting system improvements, to compressed air requirement reductions, and also efficient systems, and then looking at efficient machinery, efficient die machines. I think over the years we have invested many millions of dollars, in rupees, billions of rupees, on improving these infrastructure. This is before we started working on any renewable energy project. So internally, I think the group, we now have over 50 plus facilities globally. So all of them had good resource persons, like good engineers and sustainability experts. So all of them got together, shared ideas, and everybody had given KPIs. So we had that culture going since 2010. So that's why we were able to achieve roughly about 20 to 25% of energy efficiency improvements in the group. Talking about supply chain, there are challenges because we do not dominate the supply chain. Most of them come nominated, and most of them have very serious price points, which we do have very little room to negotiate. But going forward, we are going to work on the supply chain, especially with the science-based targets that I talked about, which requires us to look at our product scope 3 emissions as well, which is basically anything that's coming into the product, and also use of product as well. So with the support of our customers, we will be able to guide them. I cannot share much at this moment, but there's a plan, and it will be implemented within the next 1 to 3 years, which will reduce the supply chain emissions drastically. Yeah, I hope I answered the question.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Dhananjay. And there is another question for you. It's from Aljini. Are there any zero plastic projects using in MAS? Can't it applicable as a group?
Right. Okay. So yes. So our frankly speaking, our original target was to eliminate single-use plastics by 2021. That was the plan at the beginning of 2020. So we have a project called Pirisithu Lanka, which we looked, and we divided all the single-use plastics used in the group into 3 phases. So the 3-phase program would have taken us 3 years to get there. So the initial ones, like PET bottle usage, we were able to change into glass bottles very early in the journey. I think as early as 2012-13, especially at MA's Intimates. So then everybody adopted. So those were there, but there are challenges of especially food covering, biscuit wraps, things are like that. And also with the COVID-19 hit, there were special safety regulations which required a lot of single-use plastics and polythenes come into play. So we had to take a step back and delay some of those and revise those internal regulations we set out. But we are in progress. We are constantly finding solutions. I think even recently we found something for biscuit wrappers. So things like that, we are moving forward. And if anybody has any ideas, we are welcome to check that and set it across the group as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And there are a few more questions. This question, I think actually even Dhanushi can answer, and also I think I will raise this to Ranga. This is from Nadraj. Rather than using the individual Dandru power, I suggest develop Dandru power station supply to national grid, and you can negotiate with CEB to get electricity through the national grid. Actually, this is kind of a comment. So can Ranga add something?
Yeah, as far as I know, the CEB is thinking of adding renewable through Dendro power. If I'm not mistaken, their current long-term generation plan has inclusive of some Dendro power plants. So I think it's on the radar. I hope that it will be rolled out and addressed. And I agree with whatever the comment that made by Nadaraj.
Madhusha, can I add something as well?
Sure.
From MA side, we, like I showed, we are also highly reliant on biomass, which is basically dendro. So any kind of biomass, which what we internally questioned was whether the biomass, is it, I know it's, we consider as renewable, whether it's going to be renewable in 5 to 10 years at the rate that everybody is using. So any plantation or any opportunity like that for us to engage and source biomass in a sustainable manner, which is basically commercial development, we'd like to know, and we'd like to purchase from those sources as well.
Okay, thank you. And there's a few questions for Shamodhi. I think I will direct the question, so I think Shamodhi also can answer. Due to the climate change, we need to change the crop patterns as well. Therefore, where we can get technical idea regarding the above.
That's a what do you mean by changing the crop pattern? I mean, I think the question is to know about institutes and research bodies who can provide some technical guidance, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
The point there, if it is all right, Shamodhi,
yeah, please go ahead. Yeah, it's a technical.
No, I think definitely with the climate change, we cannot practice the business as usual agriculture that we practiced over many years. There should be certain changes. The changes need to happen in different ways. One, there should be changes of the varieties of crops that we are cultivating. Secondly, we need to review and revise the areas where we are cultivating the crops and the cultivation patterns. The climate change is a risk, and when you have multiple risks, because if it is only floods, we can go for flood tolerant varieties. If it is only drought, we can go for drought tolerant varieties. But if you have alternative flood and droughts, so you can't have the varieties or crops that withstand both. So what you need to do is that you need to reduce the exposure for this risk, and you need to go for diversification. So there's a famous saying that you don't need to put all your baskets in one egg, all eggs in one basket. I'm sorry, I was telling other way around. So that means you need to make sure that the diversification. So if you have a diversification, then your exposure is less. Imagine if you have only a paddy field by a farmer, and once the flood comes or the drought comes, if your paddy field is gone, your entire income is gone. Imagine the farmer has the paddy field plus some coconut trees and few the cattle dairy. So his income is diversified. Even a drought come, he has one source to make sure that there's a backup livelihood. So likewise, diversification is very important. And at the same time, I must tell that there are a lot of research has been done and a lot of improvements also have been done. For example, when you come to paddy, we used to cultivate the 3 months or 3.5 months varieties in Sri Lanka. And we have realized 3.5 months is quite a long time, and where the exposure for extreme weather events is quite high. So the Rice Research Institute have done 2.5 months varieties, what you call the ultra short varieties. So 2.5 months is a good time where the possibility of getting exposure to extreme weather event is less. So likewise, there are new strategies coming up, and even the systems like drip irrigation and the smart irrigation is also coming up. And we have even gone to an extent integrating what you call the precision agriculture. The make sure that the data sciences, the big data analysis, and earth observation data plus the climate data with agriculture related information merge together, and you do smart agriculture with smart inputs as well. So there are changes. The only problem is how fast we are going to scale this up, and what sort of support we need to give to boost this scaling up process is the question. And that's where some of the institutions are working. In Sri Lanka, there have been certain pilot scale projects has happened. There are good experiences and bad experiences, but what we need to do is learn from the good ones, learn from the bad ones, extract the good experience and replicate it and scale it up as soon as possible. In terms of support, there is a problem about adequacy, but the support is there. If you can go and check our national adaptation plan, you can see what sort of efforts as a country we have taken towards that. Thanks.
Yes, and there's one other question relevant to the same. Are there any yield difference between chemical farming and organic farming? Will organic farming more beneficial than chemical farming in Sri Lanka? Yes.
This question, where you're putting under the bottom of a pit, I believe. It's under debate as of now. I have also done agriculture, but I think I need to be fair enough and give my personal opinion. So that's I need to. In terms of yield difference, if you look at the average yield of a crop based on the current patterns of cultivation, there can be a yield reduction, because we are using, most of the time we are using very high fertilizer responsive varieties. If you go for paddy, we go to high intensity paddy cultivation areas, say Ampara, Batiklo, where the yield is, average yield is sometimes goes beyond 150 bushels per acre. And there we use very high fertilizer responsive varieties with fertilizer applications and reaching of that. And for those kind of areas, of course, the yield might be reduced. But at the same time, I must say, the yield is depending not only on chemical fertilizer. You need to make sure that the life on soil, the soil fertility, the structure, the amount of organic matter you have in the soil, to make sure that the adequate nutrition supply is there, is quite important. But I think the farmers have moved completely away from adding organic matter, and they are relying 100% on the inorganic fertilizer. So I think there should be, of course, the organic fertilizer is the option in long run. Whatever said and done, we need to move out from the inorganic fertilizers and inorganic agriculture and move to more sustainable way of agriculture. The issue that we need to solve is how to do that. What would be the process of transformation? What sort of a support we need to do? And more importantly, what sort of a compromises you are going to make, economically, environmentally, health-wise. So you need to think many things and make sure that you do certain compromises and achieve long-term results. So that's my personal point of view. Thanks. Is there any other questions?
I'm sorry. One last question is there. While you are answering this question, I also ask all the speakers to drop their email address in the chat box. So, of course, if the participants have many other things to ask from you, so they can, I think they can direct to you. And there's another one last question that is for climate financing. Ranga, it's for you. How can we practically introduce a climate financing product aiming to transfer climate risk? So far, there's an insurance scheme introduced by Agrarian Services Department, but it is not functioning properly at all. How do we propose we take this disclosure on climate financing forward in both a policy and practical sense?
Thank you for the question. And this also being in the limelight, and there's been a lot of discussions, research, and idea exchanging has going on. among the ministries of disaster management, Department of Meteorology, and the Ministry of and Department of Agriculture, and the Climate Change Secretariat. And in our nationally determined contribution as a contribution to the overall Paris Agreement, we have mentioned as Sri Lanka, we will come up with appropriate insurance products. To create a climate insurance product, there should be some sort of a, what you call cushioning aspects also need to be there. Number one, you need to have proper data, early warning and climate related data for modeling aspect. And for that, we need to make sure that we cover the entire country with capturing the weather related data and merge it with the Earth observation data using different models and make sure that we do predictions. That's number one. And in that scale, Sri Lanka is not at the top as of now. Of course, we are working on it, and at the same time, we have technical issues. And all the time, we are blaming that our Met department is not forecasting appropriately, not correctly. The reality is Sri Lanka is at a very peculiar the place where we have very little data sources coming in. Sri Lanka, if you look at Sri Lanka, and from Sri Lanka to South Pole, there's no land mass available. So there's no land-based Met station there for measure the weather indicators. So we are completely depending on the floating weather, the measurements, plus Earth observation data, where the accuracy is not going beyond 70% anywhere in the world. So we basically, depending on the northern hemisphere based data, including one. So our accuracy level is less. So the technology is advancing. So we need to go with that technology advancing. We need to cover the entire island with the Met stations. Plus, we need to make sure that the Earth observation data is appropriately merged and that proper modeling is there. So then, based on that modeling, there should be a financing tool. What sort of financial risk is there? How to spread the risk to make sure that an insurance product is going on there? We should have a critical mass. What that critical mass? And based on that, we need to calculate the premiums and the what you call the market capitalization, etc. So it's a process. For that process, we are at the first stage. That is, we are thinking of the model. We are thinking of how to get the data, and we are in the phase of populating the data collection stations and stuff. So it will take few years to get that. As of now, we don't have we have insurance schemes, but unfortunately, those are not backed up with the proper scientific Met data and Met models. So therefore, there's a high financial risk, and the insurance providers are at a risk of bankruptcy if those kind of instruments are going on. So we need to improve that, make sure that there's a sustainable financing system. Looking at Sri Lanka's population, developing an insurance tool is not an easy thing. So we need to move ahead with that. Let's see how to go there. But it's an important area to tackle. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Ranga. And thank you very much, all the speakers, Shamoli, Danuji, Sashika, today. And also I must thank ISB, and I give very special thanks to all the participants. I hope the participants have found this session more interesting. So now we are going to close the session webinar for today. And I wish you all gain basic knowledge, an idea on climate change, mitigation, adaptation, and especially on climate financing, and also more idea on innovation and the things that you can do when you are moving to a climate resilient industry. So we look forward for more initiatives at the industrial level to overcome the climate change in future. So thank you, everyone. So let's wind up the session, and we will meet from another fruitful webinar like this in future soon. Thank you very much. Good night for you all.